All right. Good to go?
Good to go.
Oh, yeah, so it's going.
Yep.
Right. Okay, good. All right. I know how to do it now.
It only took 4 years or however long we've done this. We're getting there.
Yeah, right.
Baby
Yes.
steps.
Yes. Okay.
Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Tyler.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Eli.
And boys, we're still in the lockout, unfortunately. And the update is they're now canceling regular season games. Usually we do some small talk up at the top, but I feel like the news is just too big.
Too powerful, too overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's just start there. Games have been canceled. And what we want to do this episode, talk about the CBA negotiations and kind of break it down piece by piece. But I feel like we got to kind of just start and say, a week of games has been canceled. How are we feeling? Did we actually expect that to happen? Jesse, are you surprised or is this what you were expecting the whole time?
I'm not surprised. And this actually was what I was expecting. I actually, a long time ago, I think I made a prediction on MLB Trade Rumors' site that
you left a comment?
No, I think they were taking a poll or they did something where you could predict the date, and if you predicted the date correctly, something would happen, or and I predicted it actually for May. So I don't know if I'm I don't have good reason to believe that's not going to be the date. But a couple months ago, that's kind of how I was feeling about it. And I don't have any further confidence that it's really not going to be that late. So we'll see. Yeah.
But you think May 1st or May 15th or?
I thought I said early May. I said
pick a date right now.
Yeah.
On the record.
I don't know.
Do it.
The 7th.
Okay.
May 7th. We'll just wing it. Yeah.
That is in stone now. You cannot change that.
Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's if they don't have an agreement until May 7th, you think?
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of, I mean, and we're going to talk about this, of course, but all the indicators are not encouraging. And I think it really is going to come down to who blinks first. I think it's not a matter of the issues. There's no more talking exactly right that can be done to solve these giant discrepancies in each proposal. It's not about talking. It's about which side is going to cave, which side has the willpower and the resources to hold out the longest. And yeah, I mean, that's really what I think it is. So that's the main bulk of, I think, what we're seeing. So
yeah, I mean, that's possible. I saw Tim Kirkchin kind of talking about that on ESPN, saying it's possible this is going to be a month or two losing of the season, which if they agree May 7th, I would think that'd be a June 1st start date, something like that. So that would be 2 months gone. Eli, it'd
be another COVID season.
Yeah. Well, yeah, close to one.
Right. Yeah.
How about you, Eli? What did you think was going to happen here?
Yeah, I thought this was going to happen. Kind of what Jesse was saying about resources. Obviously, the inherent disadvantage that the players have is that in order to weather this storm and really draw a hard line on negotiations, they have to sacrifice paychecks. And owners obviously are doing that too, but there are very few people in the world who owning a baseball team is their primary source of income. And so consequently, players are always at a disadvantage. That said, very early on, really during the season last year, people were saying that the disadvantage that the players always had was amplified because at no point were they ever ready to strike in any of the last 3 or 4 CBA negotiations. Everyone had been saying that they were just, kind of looking at it as we'll figure out the deal, we'll see what happens. Whereas 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they were telling players, save your paychecks, it's going to hit hard. I know that the Players Association has stockpiled something $180 million or something to that effect, that will enable them to give out like $15,000 stipends to all the players and do that through pretty much an entire 6 month of what would be the regular season. So, everybody is, their ammo reserves are stockpiled. They're definitely ready to wait this thing out. And I never at any moment expected anything besides this, because there's no incentive to like really negotiate and really try hard until your pockets are getting hit.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been, I don't know what I expected the whole time. Like, I guess you don't believe that there's going to be games missed, at least like me personally, you don't believe that games are going to be missed until they're actually going to be missed. Because it's just like in my history of watching baseball, that's just what's happened. Like they have these negotiations, they eventually settle it anyway, apart from like, in terms of all professional sports, like the NHL, I know had that long lockout years ago now, but besides that, the players always just kind of cave to what the owners want because something's better than nothing. But no, I think a thing I've kind of taken away is how like encouraging it is that the players union has been so like unified throughout the whole process. There's apparently been reports that some of the owners don't think very favorably of Max Scherzer anymore because he's been especially like difficult to deal with through this process, which makes me like him even more. So that's pretty fun.
I guess real quick for those who don't know, Max Scherzer is on the MLB Players Association's executive subcommittee. It's a group of like 5 or 8 players or something like that. I think it's 8 players and 5 of them are represented by Scott Boras or something like that.
Yeah, I know Scherzer's on. I think Marcus Simeon's on. Andrew Miller, I saw him a bunch. Garrett Cole. Yeah, I don't know the rest of them, but yeah, so they're like right involved. If you're following it on Twitter all week, it was kind of comical the way that it was like covered because they were doing these negotiations in Jupiter, Florida, at I think the Cardinals like minor or like spring training facility, and like the representatives went like back and forth between these 2 buildings through a parking lot, and so all that you were getting all week was like pictures of one person walking one way, the other person walking the other way. It's like, why didn't we like rent a Hilton, like the the conference room at a Hilton, and just like figure it out? Why are we at a baseball stadium? But I don't know.
There are just a ridiculous number of pictures of people walking through the parking lot.
Yeah, a lot by Bob Nightingale from USA Today, and they're all like off-centered. He like one player is like way up in the corner. It's like Bob Nightingale, not the best photographer, but that's kind of an internet meme at this point, is how bad he is at taking photographs. So I won't harp on it too much. But so the other thing I wanted to ask you guys before we get into kind of like what's happened to this point is
real quick, Tyler. Yeah. I was just going to add that Lindor is also on the Players Association representative.
That's right.
Paxton Britton, Jason Castro, James Paxton for clarity, and as you say, Garrett Cole. Okay. Let alone Simeon, Miller, and Scherzer too.
Yeah, there were a couple like Twitter moments of the different players, because there was one, it was a big deal for a while that Francisco Lindor had a Starbucks cup. I remember that was getting talked about a lot.
I remember that too.
And then somebody else was talking about the car that Garrett Cole pulled up to the negotiations in or something.
No, that was Scherzer.
Scherzer. Oh, Scherzer.
Everyone was so mad he was in a Porsche. And the Associated Press, I threw something out from the podcast Twitter about this. I was so mad. The Associated Press was like, Max Scherzer pulls up in Porsche, joins Garrett Cole and co. And it's like, what is that?
Yeah.
What does that have to do with? The owners are telling the Associated Press from the back of their Maybachs to type, to tweet this thing out. It's ridiculous, man.
Yeah. Somebody was asking like, yeah, let's ask the owners if they flew in on Southwest. Like, let's be realistic. The owners came in a private jet or in a helicopter or whatever. So like, it's just ridiculous. But the other thing I wanted to ask you guys before we get into like the what's happened to this point is people have been talking online about like missed games is basically the worst possible outcome here, which I agree. Like missing games is awful, but some are talking about it as if it's going to be like a death blow to the league or like some sort of thing that the league can't recover from. Like it's going to cost you fans for forever. I don't know. I mean, yes, obviously there's a limit there. Like you can't miss half the season without costing some fans, but I don't know at this point if I'm ready to say like these 6 games they're going to miss is like a disaster and the league can never recover from it. But maybe you guys have a different perspective on that. Eli, did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, where I'm at, I think that death blow is obviously really strong, but I think that, to say that the casual fan who during spring training might like to take a trip to Florida and see a couple games, and take a little family vacation for a couple days, like that casual fan seeing this and just like seeing the drama might just say it is not worth it. Like, I don't enjoy baseball that much. Like us three, we're clearly going to keep watching baseball. And obviously over time there will be, like whatever we lose here will come back because it's a sport. People like sports, people like entertainment. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bad look. It's a PR hit. It's not positive on any front. I don't think anyone's arguing that, but yeah, I guess I'll say that death blow is a little strong, but I definitely think there are going to be, and I think there probably already are, some consequences for this.
Yeah, and I will say, like, death blow, I think is my word. I don't know if I've seen anybody use that terminology, but I have seen people say like this will cause damage that can't be fixed necessarily. And I don't know about that. Jess, you were kind of shaking your head no.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I think that's a little excessive. Yeah, I mean, right. I think kind of like what Eli was saying, it's not a great look. It's not the ideal image that you want to project to fans and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, right, especially if it is just 6 games, right, people are going to forget about that in no time, I think. So, I don't think it, at least where we're at right now, I don't think the sport is in severe jeopardy of substantially crashing or losing popularity or anything like that.
Yeah, which I think that's also like part of the calculation the owners have probably made too, is like, we can miss games, and yes, we'll obviously lose revenue from people going to those games and people watching on TV, advertising, yada, yada, yada. But the early season games are the games while we're still competing with the NBA and NHL and fall TV shows that are still running through their season right now. Yes, losing opening day is kind of like societal, like, it's like a holiday kind of in this country. Even if you don't love baseball, like opening day is a big deal. It's fun. But if we get back on the field by June, then I think we still are in a good position. I think that's probably the calculus the owners are doing, which I don't want to play into that too much, but I don't know that I disagree with it either.
I also just want to say, like, baseball, kind of like you were alluding to, is very deeply rooted, into the culture in the United States, right? So, the Major League Baseball survived the steroid era. They survived the players' strike, in '94. I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, it's gonna go on, and as you kind of both have just said, we think it could drag on for a month or two into the season, and that would change things a little bit. But we'll keep tabs on that for sure. All right, so let's get into kind of what has happened with CBA talks here. So sort of have a basic timeline here that picks up at the start of this past week, although we should maybe start at the beginning of the off season. Basically, the lockout started December 2nd. Then I believe we went 40 plus days before 43. Eli knows. 43 days.
I got my receipts here, Tyler. I'm ready to rip. Don't you worry.
Absolutely. So, I mean, interject wherever you see fit. But when 43 days before another offer was made, very little action between then and this past week, where the league, the team owners, or representatives from the team owners and representatives from the Players Association met down in Jupiter, Florida. And they met for about 10 days of varying lengths. The sides failed to reach an agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement. And as a result, the owner-imposed lockout of players has continued. And then in a very bizarre press conference on Tuesday, Commissioner Rob Manfred seemingly gleefully announced that the first 2 series of the 2022 season were going to be canceled. I guess we'll stop there because I think we talked about the press conference before we got on here, but not since we pressed record. What a weird press conference that was. He started off he came in laughing. First of all, he was laughing as like the press was putting like their recorders and stuff up at his podium, kind of was joking around with reporters, then like struck a somber tone for like 4 seconds to say like, I got to make this announcement I never wanted to make. We are going to be canceling games. but then proceeded to like laugh and joke around with reporters throughout. He was asked by a reporter, why did it take until this past week for there to be serious talks? And his answer was like a word salad of like, well, we did start talking this week, so that's why we didn't start talking until this week. And I was like, what? That makes no sense. What did you guys make of this press conference from Rob Manfred? Eli, do you want to go first?
Yeah, what I made of it was, it was always their plan to like drive the negotiations to this point where they are putting the players' salaries at risk and when they have the most leverage. And he had to come out and pretend to be upset about that. But quite frankly, Rob Manfred represents the owners. He's very good at his job and they pay him a lot of money. So I don't think he's truly upset to be in this situation. I don't think he's disappointed. I don't think he's surprised. I don't think there's really like any remorse whatsoever. This is very matter of fact for him. This is business and he's totally comfortable where he's at. I think that this was just like a surprising show of his true colors, but yeah, he is at a situation where he and the owners that he represents have the majority of the leverage. They have all of the financial security in the world, and they are willing to wait this out to make sure that their profit margins for the next 5 years are as vastly large as they have been for the last 5 years and the last 20 years. So yeah, he came on, he was not upset, and people like myself were irate, and it is what it is. He's a clown.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the takeaway I've seen from a lot. I know Marcus Stroman like straight up tweeted that he's a clown.
I love Marcus Stroman. I love, dude. His Twitter. I love it.
Yeah, he's a unique guy to follow. Jess, what were your takeaways from the press conference?
For sure. Well, I love Marcus Stroman as a pitcher and as a and his Twitter account and stuff like that too. But yeah, he seems like he's definitely an interesting person. But as far as Manfred goes, I mean, the thing about him is that, I mean, people got to understand like his background. First of all, like he is a businessman first and foremost out of anything. But yeah, the one thing I would take some exception to with what Eli said is I'm actually not sure how good he is at his job. I think that he is not the figurehead, the ideal figurehead for the owners, as partly evidenced by that press conference. I'm not sure how like politically savvy he is, and definitely in his communication with the media and stuff like that. I think there are gaffes and missteps pretty frequently. So, and I just think that was further confirmed by this press conference. So, I'm not sure.
Can I say one thing real quick?
What he does, but yeah.
So, like, my only rebuttal, I guess, is you and I are kind of defining what his job is in two different ways. Like, he is hired by the owners, paid by the owners, and his job is to represent their interests, really. And he has been the primary negotiator on like countless of these CBAs going back before he was actually the commissioner. Maybe not primary, but he was like, in the small group negotiating these. And he's like a large part of the reason that the owners have walked away with such ridiculous advantages every time. And yeah, I mean, I think he's doing the same thing here. And, like if you had to write up a playbook for what the owners should have done this year, yeah, you implement the lockout so players cannot, you put them at a disadvantage. They can't like work with the team. The free agents are all going to have to scramble to sign in like a week. So it's going to be probably some subdued salaries because they won't have the ability to like properly negotiate and generate their market. There's going to be like that. I don't know. They have all their leverage, like we've said. So I think he's doing everything that he's needed to a T. And I think what it really shows, that he sucks with the media is that the owners are not concerned about how he does with the media, right? They're concerned about what he does in these CBA talks. And this is where he excels.
Yeah, I mean, that's I don't know who to critique, whether it's Manfred himself or the owners in the way they approach owning a baseball team. but there's certainly a disconnect between what I think that fans actually want and what owners seem to think fans want, or at least what owners are saying fans want. And Manfred said this multiple times, that the fans want like the expanded playoffs and stuff, which I don't know what evidence there is to suggest that, but we're going to get to that in a minute. But like,
I definitely want to talk about that later. Yeah.
But just some of the things Manfred has done, like I literally just pulled up his Wikipedia page, and like the subheadings is like, one of them is the Houston Astros sign stealing scandal, which not Manfred's fault, but the way he handled it in terms of how he disciplined the players, which was not at all. That's a tarnish on his reputation. Something else that wasn't even on here is he called the World Series trophy a hunk of metal. A piece of metal. I'm sorry. That shows a general disrespect for, the end goal of all of this. There's been the issue with juice baseballs and all that stuff that he's really done nothing to go against. There's just like a lot of, like Jesse said, there are some gaffes there, and he's just not very good at the PR side of it. So he thinks, I don't know if he thinks that he's pulling the wool over the eyes of the fan base and of players to the association. I'm not sure what he thinks he's doing, but in that respect, he's not very good at that. But yeah, you're right, Eli. He does. The baseball does a good job of crying poor all the time, and they do convince a portion of the fan base that the players should just accept what they're offered. They make millions of dollars, quote unquote, to play a kid's game. There is certainly a portion of the fan base, probably in particular the older portion of the fan base, which is big and not online as much as we are, that agrees with what the owners are saying. So I think in that regard, he does do a good job there. But just his legacy long term, I don't know. He's had a rough go here.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think that his legacy, in the minds of the public will be absolutely horrendous. Yeah. But I think that, if you look at his job description as like, I don't know, representing the owners and getting more money in their pockets and like representing their interests, like juicing the baseballs created home run surges, created all these super popular players that now people absolutely adore. Like the pitchers hated it, but I think you could argue it was really good for the game, and yeah, he said nothing about it because he's not good with the media, but like he did this thing and this thing happened. So yeah, again, I think it's just like how we're defining his job description. Like, I despise him. I wish he never existed, but like I think he is doing the thing he was hired to do.
Right. And I mean, we should say, like, if it wasn't Rob Manfred there, it would probably be some other empty suit that the owners parade around anyway. True. And maybe he or she would be a little more eloquent with the media, which would be nice, but it wouldn't necessarily improve anything on the field.
Right.
But okay, so moving on, kind of part of sort of what we're talking about here is that between Monday and Tuesday, there seemed to be evidence or suggestion from media outlets that an agreement was getting kind of close. I think the two people really pushing this were Bob Nightingale from USA Today and John Heyman on MLB Network. Were kind of tossing out there that like there was some positive feelings, things were moving closer. I think Monday was the day that the two sides discussed things for about 17 hours within a 24-hour span. And yeah, that does sound encouraging. However, since then, a lot of players and the Players Association themselves have kind of said like that was never true. There was never going to be an agreement. We were never even close. Like, yes, we inched closer to each other, but there was still a massive gulf between us. So I don't know. I mean, it's odd to me that they would meet for so long on a day, but not come anywhere close. So I don't know. Where do you guys think the truth lies in all of that? I tend to kind of side with what the players are saying, because at the end of the day, we do know where the numbers are between what the players want and what the owners want. And there does seem to be a pretty big discrepancy there. But do you think there was ever, maybe not an agreement in place, but like an opportunity to say, hey, let's end the lockout and keep talking? Was there anything like that potentially happening? Or was this all just a fallacy and a PR spin attempt by the league? Jesse, do you want to go first there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I'm not exactly sure what did happen, but yeah, it does, like, to me, I am more trusting of like the players saying that basically we weren't any closer in any realistic, meaningful sense, right? So yeah, and I just say that because the players don't have any reason to lie about that exactly, right? They could say, look, we're still far apart, but things did get better. We did, come closer or whatever. So the fact that they weren't willing to say that, and they were all, against the idea, basically, that any meaningful progress had taken place, that definitely makes me more inclined to think about to believe that side of the story.
Yeah, definitely. Eli, similar takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. I saw the thing that Ross Stripling had thrown out, and he had said, they put a bunch of fine print in that was nothing like what we had talked about, and basically tried to slip this stuff through us at the last minute, at the final hour. I would say the 11th hour, but it was after midnight already. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a PR tactic. I think it's disingenuous communications by the owners, and that's all.
Yeah.
If you listeners can't tell what side of this we're on yet, then maybe you should just go now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure the people that do listen to our podcast probably tend to agree with us. So I'm sure we're kind of preaching to the choir a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it definitely seems, I think, again, sort of like an out of touch attempt to maybe sway people's perceptions by going to
exactly
a Bob Nightingale and a John Heyman, two older guys who kind of get dunked on by the younger generation of baseball fans online, because a lot of what they say tends to be wrong, or so, I don't know, just cast a wide net and hope something gets caught a lot of the time. So again, that might appeal to an older generation of fan that is not on Twitter. I always have to kind of think about that, because you can get pretty insulated when you look at Twitter and everything confirms what you're saying, but then there's this big population that does not agree with what you're saying. So yeah, I mean, it probably was just an attempt. Like I said, the two sides have gotten closer this past week, but the numbers, which we'll talk about in just a second, are still pretty far apart. So where we go from here, it's not totally clear what happens from here. Apparently the two sides are going to go back to New York, where MLB is based, and negotiate further, but there's not going to be as regimented of negotiation systems as was in place down in Florida, when everybody was in the same, I don't know, facility for a week straight talking about things. So yeah, I mean, it's all open-ended from here. It could last another month, 2 months. The whole season could be canceled. But I do think it's important to note again that the season doesn't have to be canceled. This is an owner-imposed lockout, a quote-unquote defensive lockout, in Rob Manfred's words, to protect the 2022 season. That doesn't seem to be working out great right now. The owners could end the lockout at any moment, and we could have baseball tomorrow, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen.
Yeah, before that comment of protecting the season and all that stuff, and before the 43 days before their first offer, he also said the lockout was supposed to quote-unquote jumpstart negotiations. So at that point, you can clearly just start to ignore the entire rest of that statement.
Yeah, exactly. And Manfred did say in his press conference that the owners have made the most recent offer. So that would indicate he believes the players are next to make an offer. Again, I don't know if that is true, but that is what Rob Manfred is saying. So take that with a gigantic grain of salt.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing about that is, I mean, how meaningful is just making an offer, right? I mean, any side can make an offer. The reason these offers get made is mainly for PR purposes from the player side and from the owner side. I mean, of course, if the other side accepted it, then, it'd be a go, but that's not going to happen. So these proposals at this point are publicity stunts for the most part. So.
Yeah, which might, that might have played into the optics of having everybody down in that facility in Florida. Is like, oh, look, we're walking over to this side. Oh, that side's walking over to us. It's like, isn't that cool how that works? Which is very silly.
Look at us meeting in the
middle. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. But that is what they did. All right, so let's talk about the issues at hand here. So this is obviously not all encompassing. These CBAs include a lot of stuff. So we're not going to talk about every single thing that is in these offers, partly because it's a lot, and second, because we probably don't even know everything that's in the offers. But these are kind of the big things that were talked about this week. And if you guys have anything else, feel free to add it in here. But I think the top billing here, the biggest thing that needs to be discussed is the competitive balance tax. For people that aren't familiar, basically this has been treated, this is a soft cap. People always talk about how MLB does not have a salary cap, which they technically do not. Teams can spend whatever they would like to spend. However, for a while now, for a couple decades now, MLB has had some version of a competitive balance tax where if a team spends over a certain amount of money on their payroll, they then get taxed on that amount of money that they go over. And what has ended up happening now is teams essentially treat it like a hard cap, apart from, I guess, the Dodgers kind of go over it every single year and don't really give a shit. But a lot of teams do not go over it. And if they do, they try to get back under it after a year because then your penalties reset and you don't have to pay as much tax as you did before. So that's a very rough and ready definition, but Google it and we'll provide links in the show notes on where you can find more on that. But that was a big thing that needed to be discussed. In 2021, the competitive balance tax was $210 million. The owners proposed raising that to $220 million in 2022, but then they were going to keep it the same for 3 consecutive years, eventually going up to $224 million in 2025 and then $230 million in 2026. The players wanted to start off in 2022 with $238 million, going up to $263 million in 2026. So there's a massive gulf there. And I did want to note that the editor-in-chief of Baseball Prospectus, Craig Goldstein, made a note that if the CBT had grown with revenues over recent CBAs, the CBT would currently be at $297 million. So right there, even what the players would want is screwing the players. And even still, the owners don't want to go that far. Jesse, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I just wanted to say really quick that because I don't think you said the term, but this is what everyone talks about when they're talking about the luxury tax, right? Yeah. The luxury tax is the other term for this. So just that's a much more common thing that more people probably heard. So I just wanted to say that. But as far as this, basically, this is kind of an important thing because right, there is no hard salary cap in baseball, but of course the players don't want this, right? Because it disincentivizes teams from spending money just in general terms. So, so if teams are less incentivized to spend money, then they might be not as willing to go as high on a given player for a particular offer, whatever. And
this is kind of the issue that I think that we talk, like coming into these negotiations was like one of the biggest things, because the players getting squeezed out of the league are not the high dollar. They're not the Fernando Tatises and the Max Scherzers of the world. They're the guys that have been in the league for 3 or 4 years, are going to make like $4 million, but aren't that good. So teams just decide, I'll offer you a minor league deal, or I'll offer you nothing at all. And they end up going to the KBO or to Japan or whatever. So the fact that MLB wants to basically raise this a minuscule amount and nowhere near pacing with inflation or with revenues or anything is, I think, a humongous problem and a reason that no deal has been agreed to, because this is one of the biggest issues and they just decided to offer the players nothing on it, which I don't know how you rectify that, but I think this could be the major stumbling block in everything. Eli, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so couple little notes. The note you made about the $297 million of what it would be if it had grown with revenue, just to kind of put those in different numbers. The competitive balance tax has risen 18% over the 2 previous CBAs, while revenue over those 2 previous CBAs has grown more than 40%.
Yeah.
So, it's something that is supposed to, kind of impact the percent of revenue that is going to players for those larger teams. The teams with more and more revenue, they're trying to make sure that their revenue spending does not track with that. Mm-hmm. However, as revenue has gone up, the CBT has not risen at the same like proportional level. So what you guys had mentioned about it being a soft cap, I want to emphasize that teams do really treat this like a hard cap. Only the Dodgers and the Padres actually exceeded this last year.
Mhm.
And there were 5 teams within $3.4 million of it. So, every team is totally willing to run right up to it, or the big money teams, I should say, are willing to run right up to it. But people really do treat this as a hard cap. They have, mandates from ownership to get below it in any given year, to, not spend more than 2 years above the line, whatever. And then the other thing about this is, talking about competitive balance, and kind of the whole premise of this is that if we somewhat lower the really top tier of spending on teams, there will be more parity in the game because everybody will be paying more similar salaries. Kind of what has happened is that top has been limited, but we've seen teams dropping payroll down to $60-50 million a year. And so then, you've still got teams paying like 4 times as much as another team on payroll. And, it hasn't really assisted competitive balance in any way, shape, or form. All it's done is really limit that top dollar. And that's what the players are really upset about. If you have this competitive balance tax, you need measures in place that incentivize spending to kind of correspond with it. And that's how you bring teams toward the middle. You need to limit both the top and the bottom, whereas this only limits the top.
There's no like mandated salary floor, right? That teams are required to spend for their product on the field.
Yeah, the owners actually had proposed that. They proposed like a $100 million salary floor, but the collective bargaining or competitive balance tax. CBA and CBT is the most unnecessarily similar acronym pairing. But yeah, so they were going to bring the CBT to 180 million. So they were going to drop it $30 million from this year.
Right.
And just give 1,000 teams, the incentive to not pay $30 million on their payroll.
Okay, another big issue on the table has been minimum salaries. This is one area where it seems like the two sides have actually kind of come together in a reasonable enough a way. I think in 2021, minimum salary in Major League Baseball is $570,500, and the MLBPA would like it to be $725,000 with an increase of $20,000 each subsequent year of the CBA. MLB's most recent offer has the minimum salary up to $700,000, eventually going up to $740,000 by the end of the CBA. So still, I mean, in terms of percentages, that's still a big gap, but it's a little bit closer than some of the other things we've been talking about. And it is important because I think it's like 1/3 or 2/3 of all the players in Major League Baseball are on these minimum salaries, or maybe they're making under $1 million or something. So, this makes up a substantial portion of the workforce that baseball relies on.
Just real quick to clarify that number, 63.2% of players are pre-arbitration. So almost 2/3 are basically eligible to be just stuck on this minimum and have no choice about it. Typically, a lot of them will make, $50,000, $100,000 more than the minimum as they get a couple years in. But I know that Jacob deGrom had in his 3rd year, so his last year of pre-arbitration, they offered him like a $7,000 raise from the previous season. And if he didn't accept it, they were going to threaten him with the minimum. Or they threatened him with the minimum if he didn't accept a $7,000 raise. And in his 3rd year, he's one of the best players in the game. So these pre-arb salaries are dictated by the teams, really. Like the players can accept, quote unquote. But I think the only restriction is that if you're in the major leagues, you have to be paid at least 80% of your previous salary, and it has to be the minimum. So the teams really just dictate whatever they want. And so this minimum, given that 63% of players in the MLB are truly like in this category where they could just be paid the minimum if they wanted to be paid the minimum, or if the teams wanted to pay them that, this is really what the Players Association is looking at as one of the most critical critical issues, because this is where they are going to get the influx of actual payroll into their constituents, so to speak.
Yeah, and this is also like the portion of a player's career where a lot of times they're maybe not their absolute most productive, but this is like starting to be part of the prime of a career for a lot of players. Like maybe their rookie year, they scuffle a little bit, but then it's usually like that second, third year, they are pretty darn, if you're going to be good, you're already really good in like your second and third year. So these teams are paying you $550K a year or $600K a year while getting potentially like an MVP level player. You know, they're taking advantage of you. And this is a problem. Jess?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say about this is like the distinctions in the two sides on this. I mean, this is almost nothing to the owners, right? I mean, the $25,000, this is, you know, less than a Rule 5 draft pick, you know, what is coughed up during a Rule 5 draft pick, which I think is like $50,000 to claim somebody, and then what they give 20 back if they don't make it all the way through or whatever. So, I mean, I get that it's annually, I get that it impacts, you know, a wide number of players throughout the league, but I mean, the you know, 725, and I get that it goes up at different rates and everything, but I mean, it's a pretty this one is one of the more pettier disagreements, I would say.
Yeah. So I mean, one note, I mean, I guess, yeah. Well,
it's not. Let me just clarify. It's not petty from the player's side, because it's going to make a big difference for them.
Right. And
yeah.
Basically, as the business of the game has driven us to a point where more and more younger players, you know, basically the calculus is I can get a player to, you know, come in and give me like 60% of the productivity that, you know, somebody who just hit free agency and is kind of a middle of the run player would give me. I can get 60% of that productivity, but I don't have to pay them fair market price.
Like 4% of the cost, right?
Right. You know, instead of paying that person $4 million a year, whatever it is, because they just hit free agency, I can go ahead, I can pay this guy $550,000, and he'll be like not nearly as good, but I'm paying him so much less that the trade still kind of works out.
Right. And just to like also to elaborate, that the whole idea of like free agency is okay. Yeah, you're not going to be paid much at the beginning of your career, but once you hit free agency, then your payout is going to come. Right. But the owners are changing it so that actually, no, we don't want to give you the big payout at the end of your career or in the middle of your career if you're lucky. Right. You know, we'll offer you a tiny bit at that point, but we're really just going to replace you with one of these younger kids we can play for cheaper. And for Oriole fans in particular, I mean, this, I think, has a lot to do with why Adam Jones is not still playing Major League Baseball, right? He is a perfect example of a guy who, because of how the game was trending, kind of probably didn't get the offer that he would have wanted from Major League Baseball and decided to play overseas. So,
and I was going to say Hanser Alberto. I mean, he had like a nice solid season with the Orioles, and then he was going to get a raise to like $2 or $3 million. And the Orioles were like, no, we can go find a rookie who will do kind of what you do, probably a little worse, and pay him a third of that.
And the Royals gave him a minor league deal.
Exactly.
He got a minor league deal. Yeah. So they're like, yeah, we're not actually going to even commit to paying you the major league minimum. Sorry. But yeah, one other note, like to kind of illustrate that whole trend of not paying older players, is since 2003, the average service time of players in the big leagues has gone down by over a full year. And so the average service time of somebody in the major leagues is like, I think it was 3.7 years in 2019, right? So this is, you know, the average player is 1 year into arbitration. And like, just like we were saying with Hanser Alberto, right? You know, he starts to get a couple raises in arbitration and teams are kind of like, I think we're good. Thanks.
Yeah.
And send him on his way.
Well, and the other type of player I think about is like a Stevie Wilkerson type who, like, if we're honest, Stevie Wilkerson is not the type of guy. Fair, you know, we're talking about these people that get kind of screwed, who are good enough. They are MLB quality players and could play for a decade, and they get screwed by the system. But then there's a guy like Stevie Wilkerson, who's probably not good enough to stick around for a decade, but is good enough to, you know, stay on a roster for part of a season, get that minimum salary for part of the year. And this is coming after he has gone through the minor leagues for years, made no money, probably gone into debt, depending on what his background is, his family background, if they have some money or whatever. He's gone into debt just to be a professional baseball player. You finally get to the big leagues to get that payday, which, I don't make $550,000 a year. So that'd be cool, to get that. And you understand you only have it for a couple of years of your life. And then you have to go get a real job, quote unquote, a real job. You know what I mean? So it affects those types of players too, that only get a bite at the apple because they are fringy players too. So this helps everybody down the ladder for professional baseball players. So this is a huge deal. And even though the sides do appear, it doesn't seem that big on paper when you expand it out, it is a huge deal for a lot of different families at the end of the day.
Let me just throw out 2 more notes on this. So of like the 4 major American sports leagues, MLB, NFL, NHL, and NBA, the MLB currently has the lowest minimum salary. And another note on that is that the MLB proposal we talked about starts at $700 and over the 5 years of the CBA escalates to $740,000 a year. That price level, $740,000 a year per 2021 salaries, would only put us second from the bottom on that list of the 4 major sports leagues in America. So it definitely when you look at the value that all of these leagues provide, or really like the value that we put on them as consumers of it, this is really just like fractions of that whole pot. And relative to other leagues, MLB definitely is falling behind.
Yeah. While revenues do soar, we should always repeat that.
Right.
The league likes to talk about how they don't make any money and how these teams actually lose money a lot of times. It's like, well, what are you doing it for? Billionaires and 100 millionaires don't just like to see their money go away. So
right.
that is a fallacy. All right, let's talk arbitration. That's another element of these CBA talks. So there's a couple things here. The MLBPA wanted to expand the number of players that qualified for Super 2 status, because typically our arbitration, you get that after your 3rd full season in the big leagues, but there are some players that do qualify for it after 2 years. These are usually like the top performing players with 2 years of service time. I think Anthony Santander was a Super 2.
It's actually defined, it's the top 22% of people in terms of service time in those 2 years. But it just kind of like corresponds because you always want to bring your best players up like as soon as you get after that service time threshold to give them the full year.
Right. That makes sense. So yeah, so the 22% Eli was talking about, that's what it currently is. MLBPA wanted to expand that. However, my understanding is they have actually backed off of that, and currently that is not part of the offers being talked about. That could change. Hopefully it will change. But so that's off the table right now. But what is on the table from both perspectives is the creation of a pre-arbitration bonus pool. So this would be money that would be distributed to the top 30 pre-arbitration players based on WAR and several awards, MVP, Cy Young, stuff like that. And what is that? Both the owners and the players have agreed they want this pool. It's going to happen whenever a new CBA is agreed to. But there's a humongous discrepancy in the amount of money in this pool. I think for a long time, MLBPA wanted like $125 million in the pool. They have now relented all the way to $85 million. MLB has offered $30 million. That is a ginormous gulf between the two sides that is, again, a huge hurdle there. But so I don't know what we can really discuss here other than the owners are literally like spitting in the eye of the play association.
I can give a little more context on those offers too. So yeah, MLB started way up over 100 million, and the owners started at 10 million.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the players, it was either 125 or 115. I can't quite remember, but the players have now it was 115 or 125 coupled with, I think, like an entire fourth year of arbitration. So not just like Super 2 was expanded, it was 100% of players are Super 2 and would get 4 years of arbitration.
Okay.
And then they backed off to like 85% of players get arbitration. And then they backed off to like 35%. And now they have totally backed off and brought their like arbitration pre-arb pool down, to this $85 million mark. And the owners have gone like, $10 million.
Oh, and didn't the owners also offer like, oh, if you finish in the top 2 in Rookie of the Year, we'll give you a full year of service time. Okay, four players get it.
That is the most egregious, offer, right? I mean, because exactly, the idea that the Players Association, like, we don't, like, at least from my perspective, I don't want, Tatis and Machado and the rest of, the top tier, them making $800 million is not nearly as important to me as, all players making a good amount, right?
Yeah.
So, right. And that's the same for the owners too. Like, they know I can go and I can pay someone $40 million and it won't hurt my bottom line as long as I can still pay all these people $500,000.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. They definitely are benefited from kind of the inequality and the disparities that the players have in their salaries and stuff. That's absolutely true. But yeah, I mean, so I mean, the 2 Rookie of the Year candidates, I mean, that impacts 4 people throughout the entire league. I mean, how is that really helpful at all? It's not.
Well, and so this bonus pool, it's 30 players. And MLB has offered $30 million. So it's literally $1 million a player. Well, they've agreed to go up to $700,000 for the salaries already. So it's another $300K. I mean, maybe, I guess it's $1 million on top of that.
Yeah.
But
it'd be on top.
It's still like an absurdly low amount of money.
Yeah. So I'm just throwing out another fact here. So a lot of studies have been done on actually trying to calculate like the market value of one war. Uh-huh. And a lot of the stuff that I've seen have fallen on like the $7-8 million range. And admittedly, the article that's in my head was written, I think, 2 years ago. So $7 to $8 million for one war. The average like starting player in the MLB produces about 2 WAR. So, you get somebody who is a Rookie of the Year candidate and is making $500,000, and you say, you know what, guy, we're going to give you $1 million. It's like, well, and Rookie of the Year is probably generating 4 or 5 WAR. 4 or 5 times 7, what is that? 35 and $40 million, whatever. Like, you're making such an insane profit on that player. And so, like when this is what the owners are fighting over, or like, this is their concession to us. It's like, your top 30 players can each get $1 million. They know that the profits they're making on those top 30 players are still so obscene that makes absolutely no difference whatsoever.
Right. Well, and also, like, I mean, your point about what a win is worth, MLBPA's offer is even low. 85 million divided by 30 players. That's less than $3 million a player. Like, it's all across the board. Like the theme is MLBPA is willing to take a bad deal, just a slightly better deal than what the owners are offering them.
Right.
And just to Eli's point, right? Also just in jersey sales, right, of the player that won Rookie of the Year or came in second, or had a lot of discussion about possibly winning Rookie of the Year, right? Jersey sales, all the money that they produce for not even just their play on the field, right, but also just the hype around the player and all the money that brings in for the team because of that. I mean, that far exceeds, of course, $1 million. So
yeah, I mean, Vlad Guerrero Jr. made what, $600,000 last year. Yeah, I get his dad's a Hall of Famer, and I'm sure he's got some money, but like, still, that's just absurd, absolutely absurd.
Right.
All right, another big thing. Oh, go ahead, Jess.
I was just gonna say, without Shohei, he would have undoubtedly have been the MVP.
Right. Without a historic season
For sure.
from
Right.
from a
Someone who-
generational player. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like quite possibly the best single season ever from a
Yeah.
human being. Yeah.
Exactly. And Shohei doesn't even make that much money. I think he's
Yeah,
gone through
he's
arbitration
making
once.
like $2 million or something like that.
Insane. All right, expanded playoffs are also on the table, and apparently both sides are okay with expanded playoffs. MLBPA is open to a 12-team playoff. I think it's currently at 10 teams make the playoffs. So MLBPA is open to 12 teams. MLB really wants 14 teams. However, their most recent offer was including a 12-team playoff scenario. How do you guys feel about this? I mean, a long time ago, I think there were 2 playoff teams in baseball, and it was just like the AL winner faced the NL winner, and that was the World Series. There were no real playoffs. So, Jesse, you said a while ago you had some thoughts here. So, do you want to go?
I have big opinions on this. Yeah, and actually, this is. I mean, definitely don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that I hate about all of this. With the owners and everything, but I hate this. I really hate this. I mean, just thinking about like being a fan of baseball, I hate the idea of, kind of opening the door to more teams getting into the playoffs. The first thing, as I was kind of, one, it encourages kind of mediocrity, right? If you have an 87 win team, like, why do we need to be great? Let's just do what the Braves did, get into the playoffs. And then, we'll sign a couple of veterans who have playoff experience, a Lance Lynn, a Adam Wainwright, whoever, right? And we'll try to see. Well, I'm just saying. Yeah, right. But or Charlie, we're gonna try to find a Charlie Morton, one of these kinds of guys, and hopefully we can make some noise in the playoffs. We don't really need to go get Garrett Cole. We're good without Garrett Cole, or we're good without an ace, right? We'll just try to patch it together. So I think one, it encourages mediocrity. I mean, or not trying to put together a great team, right? Because there's less incentive to win 98 games or 100 games, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, of course, growing up, right, we had a 4-team playoff in each league, right? Mm-hmm. So 8 total. And it was very hard to make the playoffs. I mean, the Orioles, we felt this, of course, being in our division, right?
We didn't make it until it was a 10-team
playoff. Right. Like, how are we gonna, overcome the Yankees, Red Sox, the Rays, of course, and the
Blue Jays for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't as good most of the time, but in any case, so the thing is, right, like, I think baseball, with being a long season, 162 games, right, I feel like that should be the emphasis, right? It is an up and down. It is a sport where teams go through cycles, teams go through up and downs. And the idea of, in my mind, of having a 162 game season is that at the end of this long season, when every team has, gone through all their injuries and overcome the rough parts of the season, the best teams will emerge at the end of it to compete for the World Series, right? And then ideally, and I know there are a lot of flukes, the Cardinals, have been wild card team multiple times and won the World Series, and the Giants, of course, but these are like miracle teams, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't like the idea of an 85 win team sneaking into the playoffs and then winning the World Series. I hate that idea.
What did the Braves have last year? Like 87?
Like 87, 88.
They won the division though, so they would have gotten into
their division. Just sucked.
Right. Yeah. I really take big exception to that. I don't like mediocre-ish teams winning the world. Yeah, mediocre-ish teams. Yeah, winning the World Series and coming away with everything, right? Rather than like the Dodgers, for instance, who are a much better. Everyone knows they were the best team last year, right? With maybe, maybe you could argue the Astros were better, So, but regardless, like, I like the idea of the best team winning the World Series, and when you allow more teams into the playoffs, that we get further away from that goal of the idea of, you know, the best team winning. And I really don't like that. So this bothers me a lot. Of course, the owners want an expanded playoff, of course, because it makes them more money. And then also they don't have to pay players for the regular season games, right? If the season is shorter, or if there's less season, they don't have to pay
that's
them.
on the table, admittedly. I think they're only trying to make the longer.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could, in future CBAs, I could totally see that being on the table, though, being like, hey, let's cut it down to 140. You know?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, but in any case, like so I mean, that's a lot of like the calculation from their end. But I think it really chips away, kind of, in my mind, at the integrity of the game and the meaningfulness of winning the World Series and of being a playoff team, what it means to be a playoff team.
Yeah.
So, and I when they added the second wild card team and had the 1-game playoff, I kind of like that because, you know, I guess just because, one, there was some sort of not a punishment, but a disincentive for being a wild card team, right? So yeah. I kind of like that they add, and then also when the two teams play like that, yeah, they technically are in the playoffs, but it's kind of like, okay, the one that advances is really kind of in the playoffs, right? So I liked when they did that, but if they just open the floodgates here and let all the teams in like the NBA does, you know, I'm really not with that at all.
Well, and with a 12-team playoff, I mean, I would imagine would have a division winner playing in that like wild card round or whatever, like, because it'd be 3 division winners and 3 wild cards. I guess the top 2 teams would get a bye, and then the wild card, I don't know, play one of the division winners. So the Braves would have had to play an extra round next year, which, I mean, I don't know. I guess it incentivizes you at the end of the season to like go for the most wins you could possibly get versus like setting up your rotation for a series. I mean, I don't know. Like, I get where you're coming from with the playoffs, and a lot of people are like that. And I think 12 teams I could be okay with, but 14 is like pushing it. That's half the league almost. So I don't love that. 12, I could be convinced. Eli, where's your head at on the playoffs?
Yeah, I'm right with you, Tyler. I'm okay with 12, but yeah, like you said, 14 is almost half the league. You think there are 15 teams in the AL and NL, and you're taking 7 of them. If you took 8 of them, like mathematically, one of those teams should be below 500.
Right.
You know, we saw when we, you know, like actually in 2020, when we did take 8 from each league and there was the 16-team playoff, the Astros were like 29-31.
Yeah.
And
because it was a small sample size. Like I was okay with that,
sure.
But yeah.
But like the more and more you go, you know, the more we approach the threshold of half the league makes it into the playoffs. You know, like the first couple rounds of the NBA playoffs are a joke. They're an absolute joke just because so many people make it in. And really, the playoffs are supposed to be a reward for the best teams in the league. Like Jesse said, it gets rid of the incentive to be one of the best teams in the league, because you can be pretty okay, a little bit above average, and you're getting paid in October. And so, yeah, it just kind of, as a concept, I'm against that, and definitely like want it to be a reward for the best teams. You know, like Jesse was saying, like baseball is a war of attrition. It's this extremely long season. It's a grind. People go through ups and downs, through injuries, et cetera, et cetera. And making it to the promised land should be a special thing. It shouldn't be for a perfectly average team. And yeah, I think 14 teams out of 30 is way too close to that threshold.
Yeah, I mean, so this isn't on the table for this CBA, but I'm sure, I don't even know if the CBA has to be involved here, but the league has been talking about expanding for like years. Yeah. They talk about Nashville getting a team like every 6 seconds, I feel like, and like, or like Portland, Oregon, or
exactly.
or Puerto Rico or something, like some other place getting, like, they basically want to add 2 teams, I think, probably in the next 10 years. So, you know, that might make it a little more palatable, because then that ratio is lower. It's going to be less than half the
Right.
teams, obviously. So I don't know, but I think like I like the 10, 12. I could be convinced. 14, I'm not into that. But Rob Manfred says it's for the fans. So some portion of the fan base wants.
You know what?
14.
I'm sold. I'm in 14 teams.
Exactly. And then the last thing on here is the
Hey,
draft.
Tyler, real quick.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I just want to make a note that this expanded playoffs is like one of the single largest bargaining chips that the players are holding this year. Just to kind of like illustrate the whole picture for people a little bit more. I think that the expanded playoffs are definitely like what the MLBPA is holding on to as the exchange for, we will give you more playoff revenue if you pay our, pre-arbitration guys more. And I think that's like just one of the largest bargaining chips. And I think that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I should have mentioned that because, I think that's accurate. If they do go to that 14 team playoff, then the players should be getting everything they're asking for financially. Absolutely. Because there's been numbers thrown around. I don't remember all of them, but like I know ESPN and whoever else has baseball playoff games have like, there's a difference between like, if we get these many teams, you get this many more dollars, MLB. So the players are aware of those numbers too. So there is every reason and incentive for the league to give the players all the money they want if they're going to give them this big boost in revenue. So yeah, that was very important to note. Then the last thing that we've got on our list here is going to be the draft and draft pick compensation. The latest there is that MLB has actually, in their latest offer, removed draft pick compensation for free agents. So there'd be no more of the qualifying offer system, which is a win for the Players Association. They don't like that draft pick compensation attached to players. It disincentivizes teams from signing them. They usually just have to take that qualifying offer and, kind of gamble for 1 year on themselves. So that's a win for the players. We'll see if it remains in whenever offer ends up getting accepted. MLB wants an international draft. So instead of having this like post June 2nd signing period that they currently have, or it wasn't June 2nd, this year was like January, whatever. They would have an international draft. I don't think that's currently in the offer, but that is something being talked about. And then there's most likely going to be a draft lottery. That seems to almost be for sure. What is in dispute is how many teams are going to be included in that draft lottery. I think that MLB wants a draft lottery for the bottom 5 teams. I think MLBPA wants it to be a smaller amount, like 2 or 3 teams. The opposite. So
yeah, the MLBPA wants more so that they can, so that the Orioles, if the Orioles have the worst record in the league, there's a chance they could get the 8th pick.
Gotcha.
And it's an anti-tanking measure is the way that they're looking at it.
Okay, yeah. So what I think I had read was that MLB wants a 5-team lottery, and I think the bottom 3 teams, like the 3 worst teams, would actually have equal odds for getting the number 1 overall pick in that scenario. Okay. So it does disincentivize to a degree, I guess, but I think if you got one of the top 3 picks, you'd be happy. You're probably going to get a really, really good player no matter what.
Yeah. And if you're going to have I kind of think that too. Like also if you're on pace to be the 6th worst team or the 5th worst team, okay, let's not go sign this guy, right? Hoping we drop down to the 3rd worst team, like I'm just trying to say that it's not a foolproof anti-tanking measure, even though it will do something.
Right. Which I think that's been, sorry, go ahead, Eli.
I was just going to joke. The 4th team in every division now is like, oh, now we might have a shot at the number 1 draft pick. Right. Start losing a little bit more. Yeah.
Right.
Well, because like the NBA has a draft lottery, and I think it's similar where the worse you are, the better your odds are for getting the number 1 overall pick. But you could be like the NBA's the way it's set up is pretty dumb because basically if you don't make the playoffs, you're pretty much in the lottery, and then you have a chance to get the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Like, and the NBA has had a tanking issue in the past. That was like a whole thing with the NBA like a decade ago, was that there's too much tanking because the lottery almost incentivizes you to either be a really good team or a really bad team. So I don't know if this is really going to help anything. I think removing the draft pick compensation on free agents is good. The lottery's not great. But it sounds like that's where we're headed anyway. So that's a bummer. That's all I've got to say about that.
I mean, for my own selfish reasons, I hope the current system stays in place for the 2022 draft and the Orioles still get the number 1 pick. But then after that, we should stop tanking.
We're very serious, unbiased pod.
After the Orioles are able to fully take advantage of this bad system, then we can change the system.
Once Adley Rutschman is through his pre-arb years, then we can stop tanking.
That is like what I've thought about several times though throughout all this lockout. I'm like, the lockout sucks, but of all teams, the Orioles are like in the best position for this lockout because all of our really good young guys are still minor leaguers. They can still practice. They can still play games. I'm like, our future's okay versus like, I don't know, these teams that have really good MLB cores right now, you're missing out on like their best years.
Who like needs to win now. Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
So look,
I will say of our blue chippers, DL Hall cannot participate in anything though. He's on the 40-man. That is true. A little bit.
He is on there, and there are some intriguing prospects like Taron Vavra is a 40-man guy. Yusniel Diaz, if you still believe in him, he's on the 40-man. Yeah. Mike Ballman is on there.
Yeah, now we got Ballman.
Bradish.
Batista's interesting. Bradish. Yeah, we got a bit now.
So there are still some guys on there. So it's not all positive. But Rutschman and Grayson Rodriguez and Colton Cowser.
Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, Kobe Mayo, Connor Norby, all these guys.
Yeah, they'll be playing. So, that's a good note. Like, if the season is locked out for longer, go watch some minor league games. Those are really fun. And it's a little bit detached from Major League Baseball because I don't think the teams own those teams. They just like pay the salaries of the players. So do that.
We're going to need to do just a little foray into this later. But have you guys watched any college baseball yet?
Not yet this year. I know it's gotten started the last couple of weeks. Have you?
Okay,
Eli?
It's been electric.
Wow.
There is this guy, and I don't know if anybody else listening to this even pays attention to college baseball. There's this guy named Tommy White. He's a true freshman for NC State. In the first 2 weekends, which is a total of 6 games, he hit 9 home runs.
Pretty good.
And they're just calling him Tommy Tanks. And it's been electric. It's so much fun.
All right, so the Orioles need to tank for 2 more years.
Tank for tanks, right? Yeah, I would definitely recommend though. I think college baseball has been a nice pacifier in the mouth of my crying baby self.
Wow.
It's been good.
Although I will say with that though, I mean the college baseball players are like being treated even worse, right, than the Major League Baseball players. But
that's the next episode.
Yeah, right.
Well, they do have that little. What the college players can now make money off their likenesses. I don't know how helpful that is for baseball players, but it's nice.
That is true. And the other thing that I'll say is like they probably have better locker rooms, better travel, better food, and better everything than the minor league players do. So,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially the big schools. Yeah.
Right.
That's true. Yeah. Watch some college baseball too. That's true. I mean, you know, everybody probably has a college near them of some kind. Maybe it's Division 1, 2, 3, JUCO, but like there's probably a college baseball team and go watch them. A lot of times it's free to go to the games and it's probably really cold right now where you are, but go do that. That'd be cool too. All right. So I think, we're not sure what our recording schedule is going to be here because there's not going to be Orioles baseball to talk about for the foreseeable future. But when we do have our next episode, we do want to do kind of a minor league preview. We just kind of dipped our toe in the pond there a moment ago, but we want to go a little bit more all in and talk through the different levels, who we're looking at. Because that's kind of still where the meat of the excitement is in the Orioles organization, at least for 2022. I think this year into 23 is like the turning point, boys. And we're actually going to have fun Major League Baseball to talk about. But I don't want to jinx myself there. So that's what our next episode is going to be, a minor league preview, as well as any CBA updates that have come. So,
we'll see.
Yeah.
Don't hold your breath.
Absolutely. So what we'd like you guys to do is please subscribe to the podcast if you have not already. We're on all the podcast platforms. If we're not on your platform of choice, reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram, and email at The Warehouse Pod. If you can also on those platforms, give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up or whatever the highest rating you can get is. That'll help us.
I want 6 stars.
I don't know if we can do that.
I want them.
I'll
fight for him. I'll fight for him.
Okay. So okay. All right. You
Just
heard
tell
it
me
here
where
first.
to go.
We're the first.
Just tell me where to go.
We're gonna be the first podcast to get a 6-star rating. Thank you, Eli, for your service.
That's what I'm here for.
So do that for us. That helps us get into the ears of more Orioles fans and baseball fans. We really appreciate it. And then you can also follow us individually, or I guess Eli, you kind of just do the Warehouse Pod stuff on Twitter. So follow Eli there and me. I tweet there sometimes too. Jess, you have any personal things to plug?
I mean, if you're so inclined, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Juggernaut8678.
Yes, see Jesse's first tweet in years.
Yeah.
If it happens, we don't
Could
know.
drop any minute. You never know. You never know. Yeah.
It's hilarious. This is, a handle that Jesse came up with when we were in like the 6th grade. And it's just stuck around ever since. He doesn't really use social media like that. He scrolls it. He's more than happy to scroll it.
Not really
He
Twitter, but yeah.
He'll post an Instagram story. Give Jesse a follow on Instagram.
That's true. Okay,
Yeah,
Instagram's great.
definitely. Yeah.
He'll do it.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Twitter and Instagram at _Ty Young, as well as CamdenChat.com for some blogs. So yeah, that's about all we've got here, guys. Hopefully we've got some good news for you next time, but if not, we'll be talking minor league baseball.
Yeah.
But,
You know it.
Yeah. All right. Until next time, this has been the Warehouse Podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Tyler.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Eli.